Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us. We are going to give people a few more minutes to jump on the call, and we'll get started then. Thanks. Hey, everyone. To those who just joined us, thank you so much for joining the NARC legislative call. We're going to give folks maybe another minute or two to join us, and then we'll get started. Thanks. All right. Well, good afternoon, everyone, and thanks for joining us. My name is Macy Morin, and I'm a program coordinator here with NARC. And I'd like to welcome you all to our 5th summer legislative briefing, a series that we've started to help provide you with information on the biggest issues here in Washington, D.C. Today's topic will be about the Trump administration's reform plan and reorganization recommendations introduced at the end of June, titled Delivering Government Solutions for the 21st Century. While providing you with a general overview of how this reform plan could impact regions, we will also be giving special attention to the changes proposed to the Community Development Block Grant, or CDBG specifically. Please allow me to quickly introduce our speakers today. We have Neil Baumberg, Senior Policy Advisor here at NARC, and we also have a great friend of ours joining today, Vicki Watson, Executive Director of the National Community Development Association and the leader of the CDBG coalition that NARC has been very active in. And as you see here on today's agenda, Neil will be kicking us off with key elements of the reorganization plan that are important for regional leaders like you to be aware of. And then we'll introduce Vicki, who will talk about the impact of this plan on CDBG, why it's significant to regions and localities. This will be followed by a short discussion of what we will expect to happen with the plan in the next few months, and then a short time for question and answers. If you would like to submit a question to our speakers today, please feel free to type in the question into the questions box at any time on the right side of your screen. You can also use the raise your hand feature, and during Q&A, I'll be able to unmute your microphone to where you can ask questions to the speakers directly. And if you have questions using either feature, you're more than welcome to send me an email. It should be on the bottom of your screen, maceymorin@narc.org. And without further ado, I will turn it over to Neil.
Thank you very much, Macy, and good afternoon, everyone. Let me add my thanks to all of you for joining this briefing. We hope that you find these briefings useful and informative, and we really do welcome any suggestions that you may have on how to make them better or on specific topics that you'd like to learn more about. As Macy said, I'm going to provide a broad overview of the President's proposal to reorganize the federal government. President Trump's proposal would merge the Departments of Education and Labor under a new name, the Department of Education and the Workforce, a title, for those of you who are familiar with the House Committee, a title that mimics the House committee that deals with education and workforce issues. The new cabinet-level department would be split into 4 main agencies focused on K through 12 education, enforcement of worker protections, research and administration, and the Workforce and Higher Education Division. Now, called the American Workforce and Higher Education Administration, it would be charged with ensuring that U.S. workers possess the skills necessary to succeed on the job. And the administration would bring together workforce development programs from the Department of Labor and programs from the Department of Education, and thereby overseeing higher education, vocational education, rehabilitation, and of course, all of the programs under the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act. The proposal would also reshuffle other domestic agencies to make them easier to cut or revamp. And I don't say that as a NARC staff person, I am quoting the administration itself. Specifically, it would include relocating many social safety net programs into a new mega department that would replace the Department of Health and Human Services and would be called the Department of Health and Public Welfare. Now, it's important to understand why this proposal was made. Many inside and outside government have long sought to merge the various human services programs such as SNAP, housing assistance, and temporary assistance for needy families, among others, under a single umbrella agency. And this proposal would do that. The particular goal of delinking supplemental nutrition programs from the Department of Agriculture has long been sought as a way to cut costs associated with the SNAP program. Now, there is no doubt that SNAP does cost a lot. SNAP benefits cost the federal government $71 billion in fiscal year 2016. But it is also one of the most successful programs the federal government operates, supplying roughly 44 million low-income and poor Americans, that's 14% of the total population, with an average of $126 per person per month to ensure access to quality foods. And the reason it was originally placed in the Department of Agriculture, and this often gets lost in the debate about SNAP, is because it was designed to help farm families as much as low-income Americans by increasing the demand for farm products and therefore increase farm sales and farm income. Other changes in this proposal include moving CDBG to commerce, and you'll hear more about that in a moment, creating the American Workforce and Education Administration within the new Department of Education and the Workforce, which I just mentioned, privatizing the Postal Service, creating a government-wide public partnership office to, quote, improve services to citizens, relocate many staff and offices within Washington, D.C. to locations outside of D.C., outside of the Washington, D.C. region. So we're talking about beyond Maryland and Virginia as well. Consolidating food safety functions into a single office in the Department of Agriculture. So this would mean the FDA, for example, the Food and Drug Administration might be moved from the Department of Health and Human Services to the Department of Agriculture, moving USDA's rural housing activities to the Department of Housing and Urban Development, shrinking the size of the Office of Personnel Management by shifting many of its functions actually to the Department of Defense, privatizing the FAA's air traffic control system and the St. Lawrence Seaway, and revamping the Army Corps of Engineers by moving the Corps out of the Department of Defense and splitting the Corps' responsibilities, with navigation management assigned to the Department of Transportation and flood control, wetland permitting, and management of inland waterways falling under the purview of the Department of the Interior. Finally, some of you may have heard, as the New York Times reported, that the president would eliminate the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, and the Export-Import Banks. These have been longtime targets of many inside and outside government. But a review of the plan suggests that this is not a part of the plan right now, though if the president's budget were to be adopted, it would either end funding or substantially curtail funding for these programs and substantially limit their opportunity. So I am at this point going to turn it back to Macy, who is going to introduce our speaker, who will talk about CDBG and the impact that this will have on CDBG. Macy?
Great, thanks, Neil. So as we said before, we would introduce Vicki. Vicki has the overall management responsibility for the operation of the National Community Development Organization as the executive director, and this includes fiscal, staffing, and operational. She's also responsible for the association's policy and legislative work. And as mentioned at the beginning, she's also the lead of the CDBG coalition. And some of the things that have been done with the coalition under their tenure, and some things that NARC has been a part of as well, is that the CDBG coalition is comprised up of 28 national groups from all spectrums, including elected officials, grantees, and subrecipients of CDBG. Also including groups like NACO and Feeding America and Rebuilding Together. And the coalition is primarily tasked with seeking to protect funding for CDBG, especially during every year fiscal year appropriations. We have been successful in protecting the program funding under the last decade thanks to Vicki's leadership. We were successful last year in increasing program funding by $300 million. So now current funding levels at $3.3 billion. And we were also successful in maintaining this $300 million increase for fiscal year 19, receiving level funding in both the House and Senate THUD fiscal year appropriations bills for fiscal year 19. So with that, I will turn it over to Vicki. Are you there?
Macy?
Yes, perfect.
Hello?
Okay.
Okay, good. I hope everyone can hear me. I want to thank Neil and Macy and NARC for inviting me to speak to you today. Just a bit of a background on NCDA. The National Community Development Association is a national member-based association. We've been around since 1968, and our members consist of local governments that administer CDBG, HUD's Homeless Assistance Programs, APWA, and the lead grants, but our core program is CDBG. So today I'm going to focus my remarks on the OMB proposal to move CDBG to the Department of Commerce. And I first wanted to start with talking a bit about Nick Mulvaney, who is the current OMB director. This will give some context to why we are seeing this proposal. Nick Mulvaney, he's a former Republican congressman from South Carolina, and he actually created what's called the House Freedom Caucus when he was a representative in the House. And the Freedom Caucus is a group of the most conservative House Republicans that espouse, small government. Over the years, the Freedom Caucus has called for the elimination of CDBG. Besides that, as OMB director, Mulvaney, who wrote Trump's 2018 budget blueprint, that blueprint also called for drastic federal program cuts and elimination, including the elimination of CDBG. So that gives you somewhat of a context, because Nick Mulvaney and OMB actually developed this reorganization proposal. And the reorganization plan is similar to President Bush's proposal that was put forward in 2005. It was called the Strengthening America's Communities Initiative, or SACI. And that proposal called for eliminating 18 federal economic and community development programs, including CDBG, and proposed consolidating their activities into one program and moving it to the Department of Commerce. NCDA and other groups were successful in fighting back the SACI proposal. However, CDBG suffered deep funding cuts in the process afterwards. And actually, the SACI proposal is what propelled us to create the CDBG coalition, so that we could fight for the program, particularly its funding levels, to make sure that it remained intact. All right, going on to what's in the reorganization plan and the implementations for CDBG. The plan is called Delivering Government Solutions in the 21st Century. It was released on June 21st of this year. And it comes as a result of an executive order that President Trump issued on March 13th of 2017, which directed OMB to develop a comprehensive plan to reform and reorganize federal departments and agencies. As mentioned earlier, the plan proposes moving CDBG from HUD to the Department of Commerce under a new Bureau of Economic Growth. CDBG would be moved to Commerce and combined with EDA's Economic Development Assistance Program, as well as USDA's Rural Business and Community Facility Grants, the Delta Regional Authority, the Denali Commission, and the Northern Border Regional Commission. They would all be combined into one program. However, the combined programs would focus solely on economic development. That's it, economic development. So why is this reorganization plan bad for CDBG? It essentially kills the program as we know it because it strips CDBG of most of its eligible activities, those activities that focus on affordable housing, infrastructure, and public facilities and public services. Those would no longer be funded. So communities across the country, currently 1,268 communities receive funding directly or through the state, and those communities would lose these valuable resources, the affordable housing infrastructure and public services resources that CDBG provides. It's also bad for the program because even if it may not be developed and come to fruition, we may see calls for funding cuts to CDBG because of it, as we did under the SACI proposal. It also moves CDBG from HUD, which is, HUD has administered the program for 43 years. They have a long-term relationship with grantees, and they have experienced, knowledgeable staff that know the program. And we feel strongly that the program must remain intact and administered by HUD. In terms of the outlook, I've talked to folks in the Hill. It doesn't appear at this point that the proposal has much traction. I think because, this is a election year and congressional folks are really busy back home in terms of campaigning for midterm elections. So there hasn't been a focus on it, but I'm pretty confident that we will see this proposal in President Trump's 2020 budget, which will come out in February. So that's when we'll really have to amass our forces and our support and fight against this. And even though CDBG enjoys bipartisan support in Congress, we can't take this lightly, thinking that, it may not happen at all. We have to fight back against any attempt to reduce or change the program. And so the CDBG Coalition, of which NARC is a member and has been a great member, and others, we will certainly start planning for our strategy to fight back against this prior to the president's budget coming out. In terms of what you can do, you can start to reach out to your congressional offices to ask them to oppose any attempt to change CDBG or move it out of HUD or reduce its eligible activities or funding. And that's it at this point. There's very little information other than what was gleaned from the reorganization plan, but I'm more than happy to take questions.
Great, thanks, Vicki. So for those who may have missed it at the beginning, if you would like to ask a question, feel free to type in a question in the question box on your right-hand side, or you can also raise your hand and I can unmute you that way. That way you can ask questions directly. I did get one question. It says, who are the current members of the Coalition to Save and Protect CDBG, and how would an organization get involved?
Okay, we have 28 national organizations. I don't know if I can remember them all offhand, but they include the U.S. Conference of Mayors, the National Association of Counties, the National League of Cities, NCDA, NARC, the National Association of Development Organizations, National Association of Housing and Redevelopment Officials, National Association of Local Housing Finance Agencies, National Association for County, Community, and Economic Development, Rebuilding Together, Feeding America, the YWCA. There's several others, and I can't remember. NeighborWorks is a member, and I can't remember the other ones. I apologize. I don't have the list in front of me, but there are 28. And in terms of of getting involved, it's a coalition made up of national associations. So if you're a national association and you're interested in becoming involved with the coalition, you can just send me an email at V for Vicki, V Watson, WATSON, at ncdaonline.org. That's V Watson at ncdaonline.org. And we'll be happy to include you in future meetings.
Great, thanks. Yeah, and as NARC, we try to include any new information from the CDBG Coalition in our eRegions newsletter. But if this is something that you're very interested in and wanting to advocate on to your federal delegation, please feel free to reach out to me or to Neil. Our emails are at the bottom of the screen, and we're happy to pass along any information, like letters or resources that the CDBG Coalition is working on, and we're happy to do that as we go forward. So with that, I see a few more questions pop up. This one's a really great one. How does the removal of CDBG include CDBG disaster recovery funding?
That's actually a very good question. It sounds like the disaster recovery funding would not be affected because it's seen as a separate program from CDBG at HUD. So it's its own CDBG DR program. So as far as I know at this point, it would not be affected in terms of being moved to Commerce. It would remain at HUD.
Good news. Thanks. Okay, the next one. Would you share a chart of the moves, consolidations, and eliminations outlined in your review of the proposal for us to use when talking to our elected representatives? If you're meaning just the general notes that we have today, we would be happy to share them along with you. Send us an email and let us know. We're happy to do so. I'm sure that Neil and Vicki will be happy to pass along their notes and information that they have. Hopefully that answers your question. Feel free to ask me another if I didn't get that quite right. Okay, next one.
Yeah,
oh, go ahead, Neil. Yes.
Go, Vicki.
Oh, I was going to say, Macy, I will send you my notes after this, and you can just send them out to everybody.
Perfect. Okay, that would be great. Thank you. Neil, go
And,
ahead.
yeah, and I wanted to add that I was planning to do a blog posting based on this call, and so I certainly will attempt to find some kind of a chart that displays exactly what the president's proposal would do, and that may well be available in the 132-page document that makes up the proposal. I just didn't see it when I went through the proposal, but I'll look to see if I can find that.
Yeah, and if you have any trouble finding the reorganization plan, we're happy to send out a link to that as well. Just let us know, and we're happy to solve you or help you not have to do the work of trying to find it yourself. Okay, so next one. Does the reorganization of the CDBG program include the elimination of direct allocations of CDBG funding?
It's not clear, but yes, it looks, yeah, definitely it would actually from reading it because, as I said previously, CDBG would be stripped of all of its eligible activities except for economic development. Those activities would be moved over to Department of Commerce combined with the other programs and commissions I mentioned into one program that has yet to be named. And communities would have to apply for that funding. It would not be formula allocated. It would be an application process.
Great. All right. It says, next one is, have you done any assessment on the likelihood of this proposal to move forward? And is this a partisan issue?
Yes, I would say that, it is a partisan issue because, and it's not so much an overall Republican issue, as I mentioned earlier. CDBG enjoys bipartisan support. It's just the fiscal hawks, as we like to call them in the House in particular, who consist of fiscally conservative Republicans, have targeted CDBG for many years, even prior to the House Freedom Caucus being formed. There's something over in the House called the Republican Study Committee that's been around since the 70s, and that's called for the elimination of CDBG over the years as well, but not recently. So yes, it's partisan in that sense. And actually, I forgot the other part of the question.
It was, have you done any assessment on the likelihood of this proposal to move forward?
Yeah, it's too early to tell at this point. I did reach out to folks on the Hill, staffers on the Hill, and as I mentioned, there doesn't seem to be any interest in it at this point, but I'm pretty sure it'll be in the president's budget. I'm pretty sure in the sense that, he asked OMB to actually put together this reorganization plan, so I'm sure he'll base his next budget off of most of this. And I would not be surprised if CDBG is in there because in this past year's budget, it called for elimination of CDBG and home. So, yes, I think that we will see it at least in the president's budget, and that we will, have to fight for it from there. I think it really depends on, what the House looks like after the midterm elections. But I'm very confident that we can fight back against it. It just takes a lot of work, and it takes away from our efforts to try to increase funding for the program.
Mm-hmm.
And if I could add, Macy, that the White House has indicated they've got a plan B, and at least this is with respect to workforce development. And they are actually talking about moving a few programs to other agencies without achieving the full set of goals and objectives outlined in the larger proposal. Here's one example. The White House is reportedly considering just moving a few programs from the Department of Labor over to education. And those programs would be workforce training for young people, including Job Corps and Youth Build. Other ideas include redirecting the funding for DOL's adult and dislocated worker programs into an expanded Pell Grant program that would be run by the Department of Education. For worker readiness training and sending, or I should say, there's also discussion of all of the worker readiness training going over to the Education Department and sending the H-1B visa program that's currently used for high-skilled temporary workers from abroad, sending that also over to the Department of Education. So they're looking at various options, which I think means, as Vicki said, that we have to be really mindful because some of these may end up being hidden away in the budget documents that the Senate and House end up adopting. And we will have to deal with that through the appropriations process. So while I would also echo Vicki's comment that there really seems to be no appetite for this right now, depending on where the midterms leave us in terms of who's in control of the various chambers, there could be some substantial movement in the direction of these of this reorganization proposal after the election or after the next Congress is convened on January 5th of 2019.
Great. Thank you both. That's great. So just as a reminder for everybody, because I did get a couple of questions on this, we will be sending out a recording of this webinar. You should get it tomorrow about 3 or 4 o'clock. That way you'll have it and be able to listen to it again. But as we were talking about earlier during Q&A, we will be happy to send out notes too, and Vicki and Neil's notes for this webinar, and we'll also be Neil will be working on a blog that sort of covers the key highlights of this this call. It'll probably go up sometime next week. And all right, so with that, we'll skip to the next question. Is Homeland Security funding going to be affected by this reorganization proposal?
At this point, there is no indication that that would be the case. Do you agree, Vicki?
Yes, I haven't seen anything about any change in Homeland Security.
Good news. That's great. Okay. Last one here. After the president's budget is proposed next February, how long do you all expect it will take for the CDBG program to be phased out? And what strategies is the NCDA going to use to try to reduce the impact of this reorganization? And how can councils of government help?
Well, we are looking at it from the perspective that CDBG will not be phased out because, we will fight tooth and nail. We've gone down this road before, as I mentioned, with the Bush administration and with other calls for elimination of the program, and we've been successful in fighting back. CDBG enjoys not only bipartisan support, but a strong grassroots support at the local level, particularly with elected officials. So that's very helpful to the program. So no, we're not even contemplating that this is going to happen because we are certain that we can fight back against this.
Yeah. And I think it's helpful to mention too that the first two president's budgets that the Trump administration has released has slated CDBG for elimination. And we're happy to say that Congress has pretty much seen at least that aspect of it dead on arrival. And just because, like Vicki said, there is a very big appetite for this program, and THUD appropriators and those on the Appropriations Committee on both sides of the aisle see the effectiveness of this program and how it impacts the communities that they serve. And so there's no interest at the moment to eliminate this program, which is good news for us. But as far as how councils of government can help, I just always tell people to make sure to keep a strong relationship with your federal delegation, and don't be afraid to share stories of success with CDBG as maybe your cities and your counties as they're using CDBG funds to do everything from infrastructure to economic development to planning, to show them those numbers, show them pictures of those projects, and while they're home on, like recess, for example, take them out there and show them what an impact CDBG is making on the local level, because those stories really stick with them, and it helps give ammunition for the fight that we're facing every year, and seems like we will be facing for the next few years as long as Mick Mulvaney is OMB director, to keep CDBG going strong. So
yeah, so that's very good advice, Macy. And I would also say, something that I advise my members, the NCDA members, is, as Macy mentioned, particularly in August when folks are back home, to meet with them or take them on a project tour, or have them meet a beneficiary of one of the programs, to talk about the success of the program, but also to show them the need in the community, why more funding is needed with CDBG. I find that's effective too. And as Macy mentioned, yes, the Trump administration has proposed elimination of the program the last 2 years. It's it takes away from our fight to try and increase the program more because we have to argue against elimination. We were able to get an increase in 18, and that was rolled over for 19. But again, it just makes our work that more difficult, and it takes up a lot of effort to actually protect the program. But we will continue to do so.
Under Vicki's great leadership. She is our fearless leader, and we appreciate all that she does. She's great. All right, so I don't see any other questions here, so maybe we'll give people a few more minutes, but while I have you all still on the line, definitely want to thank our speakers for coming today, for Vicki, for everything that she's done with the CDBG Coalition, and for calling in today, and Neil for giving us a great overview, and who will be working on a blog very soon to cover this very important issue. And next week we'll be continuing our calls with the legislative briefings. Next week it'll be on a piece of federal broadband legislation and the implications of local and state control, and the implications of that piece of legislation on local and state control, including planning and zoning. And for those of you who haven't heard of it yet, it is the Streamline Act. So if you're interested in broadband issues, or if this is something that's important to your membership, please feel free to join us next Wednesday at 3 p.m. and call details and the registration link will be going out pretty soon. With that, I think we have everything. So
thank you, Macy and Neil and NARC, for inviting me to participate. I just want to thank NARC for its participation in the coalition.
And if I may, I just want to echo what Macy said. Vicki, we're very appreciative of the leadership you've shown in the CDBG coalition. And I think it's fair to say to the folks in the audience that Vicki has always been very, very optimistic that we could somehow increase the funding levels recently. And sure enough, she's succeeded. So we're very appreciative for that. So thank you.
Thank you, Neil. I appreciate that.
All right. Well, with that, thank you all so much for joining us today. We really appreciate you joining us today and with all of our legislative calls. And we hope to see you next week for our next one. Same time, same place. The registration link will be different, but it'll still be 3 o'clock on Wednesday. So with that, I hope you all have a great afternoon, and we'll be talking to you soon.